Let's go from here. Hello,
Hello, can you
Dr.
hear me?
Roy Casagranda. Yes, we can hear you. Oops. Okay, we
Amazing.
got
I
it.
can't believe it.
I am so sorry for all the insanity, the technical difficulties. I cannot thank you enough for being here. We're going to see if the camera works. If it does, you're going to see a request for the, and it
It
fucking
worked!
worked. Oh my
Yay!
It worked.
Woohoo!
Yay.
Miracles do happen. Okay, guys, can somebody start the screen record for me? And I'm going to give an introduction to Dr. Casagranda that I gave earlier, but I want you guys to hear again. So give me a second. Let me get to my office. And we are going to do this now. Somebody record for me because I'm not. So let's go. All right, welcome in everybody. Please share this out to the Discords. You guys are blessed enough to have Dr. Roy Casagranda with you. Dr. Roy Casagranda successfully defended his dissertation with the Department of Germanic Studies at the University of Texas in 2017. He is a professor of government at Austin Community College. His research interests lie at the intersection of politics, history, economics, psychology, and philosophy. Dr. Casagranda is a firm believer in a multidisciplinary approach. He began teaching in 1995 and began teaching at the college level in 2002. He is also the president and founder of the Austin School. Dr. Casagranda speaks English, German, and Arabic. He has lived in Germany, Egypt, Lebanon, Algeria, and England. Dr. Casagranda has also written the novel The Blood Throne of Caria, as well as published textbook materials titled WW2, which is a semester-length course module for the University of Maryland. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Roy Casagranda. How are you, Doctor?
Thank you.
We are super excited to have you. So the way that I kind of like to push this off is start off with some questions, and then we're going to move it around to the panel unless there's something that you wanted to say initially.
Not necessarily. No, let's dive in.
Awesome. As I've discussed with you, we hold several debates here on this app. Very often, the existence of Palestine is completely discredited, and oftentimes we hear from Zionists that the land was empty before Israel. What do your studies of history have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the land wasn't empty. With the exception of Antarctica, there's really no place on the planet that's been empty for probably the last 12,000 years. So the very notion that there was an empty plot of land is absurd. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about this claim is not only is it ahistorical and not really plausible, is the fact that the population that was there can trace its ancestry back to largely a Jewish population, that Jewish population that converted to Christianity and Islam over the last few centuries. It also, of course, is genetically mixed with Phoenicians and Aramaeans and Greeks and Romans as well. So there was a vibrant population that was there. It was well established. It had historical roots that went back centuries, thousands of years. So yeah, it's a nonsensical argument.
Thank you so much for that. Zio's in the comments, stay big fucking mad. Research on the research of others on this app has led us to believe that Israel is experiencing significant hardships, whether it be public opinion or my favorite topic, which is economics. Can you draw parallels to the current predicament that Israel has found itself in and former quote unquote empires that have fallen?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing you have to remember is that Israel is a small state, not just in land, but also in population. And so it doesn't have the type of economy, there's no way for it to have an economy large enough to sustain the type of warfare that it does if it's prolonged. So Israel's military is designed for blitzkrieg. And, very effectively. I mean, look what happened in 1967. So to have a sustained war that goes on for months after month after month after month is going to have very negative consequences for the Israeli economy. Also, I would think it would be fatiguing not just for the the military, but even the public, because it's, a prolonged crisis. What people need to remember is that whenever there's a war, the victims obviously experience more trauma. The population being attacked experience more trauma than the population attacking. But the attacking population also experiences trauma, because as much as we do cognitive dissonance to try to separate ourselves from the reality around us, some of it still seeps in. And we are a species that is we have it built in and hardwired to position take. In other words, it's very easy for us to put ourselves in the shoes of another person. So even with all the vitriol of nationalism and Zionism and all the other isms on the planet that sort of box us into these little categories, some of that trauma gets through to the other side. So it is a fatiguing process. And I don't think Israel has the ability to do this prolonged without the support of Europe and the United States. And of course, it has plenty of support from Europe and the United States. So as long as Trump doesn't destroy the U.S. economy, I think Israel's going to be fine. If you're hoping for Israel's economy to implode, you need the United States, Germany, UK's economy to also go down.
Got it. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open with that. I'm going to open to my panel that has been super anxious and excited to talk to you. We have Will MCC up on the box next to you. So I'm going to start off with Will.
Thank you so much. I don't know why I've been placed up here. I'm a bit massive fan, Dr. Casagranda. I guess if I can ask a question, specifically, it would be with your background in activism and like action across America and across other places, we're seeing a massive groundswell of direct action and organizing within America against both for Palestinian activists and against like fascism growing in America. Is there specific advice you can give to what organizations you're seeing grow or develop in a way that we can do this, in a way that actually builds and maintains momentum and doesn't fall to, I know you were involved in the Occupy movement, fall to kind of the issues that they ended up having to some extent of losing momentum or failing to build like concrete institutionalized political power to work against things like Israeli fascism and American fascism?
Yeah. So I've been an activist since 1990, is that right? 91. And it's been kind of a hard thing because, it's mostly been a bunch of defeats. So I'm a little battle fatigued. Occupy was spectacular, right? Because so many people suddenly were involved. And the thought that me and the activists that were there, that we had been in the trenches for a while had was, where did all these people come from? This is amazing. The problem that Occupy had, it had many problems, but one of the big problems that it had was it specifically tried to stay away from being political. Well, I kept telling them, coming into the street and occupying a space is a political act. You've failed. Your very presence is a failure in your attempt to be apolitical. And they did it because they were trying to be an umbrella organization that brought everybody in, which is great, but then you don't have a motivating principle that keeps them in. And so as time went by, people started to fall off because they started to ask themselves the question, why am I here even? I don't even know. I think it's important to try to maximize the number of people, but without sacrificing what you're there for, right? So you're trying to create a balance between the two, and Occupy was one extreme. So things like defund the police would be the other extreme. The average American is all about their own personal security, and so having a slogan like defund the police alienates that huge population. And that was one of the problems that we had with Occupy. I at one point I was giving a talk and I said, you're failing, right? And they were like, no, look at us, we're succeeding. And I'm like, no. Do you see those cars over there? And they go, yeah. I go, what are they not doing? And they go, I don't know. They're not stopping, getting out and joining you. They're driving past. They're looking at you and they're going, I don't get it, and driving past. Somehow, and I haven't figured this out, I failed. Somehow you have to appeal to enough people that you can maintain the large enough numbers, but also maintain it so that it's constantly going. So another great tragedy was the Women's March. I was in Austin in 2017, and I brought my sons, and my wife was, of course, with me. The four of us, we were blown away. We couldn't believe the number of people that showed up. It was incredible. It was the largest march in Austin's history. It dwarfed everything that happened in the 1960s. There's only ever been one march that was similar in size, and it was in a march against an Israeli attack on Gaza a few years ago. So not a recent one, not the recent one, but one in the past. And there have been so many, it's hard to keep track. And that was it. It fizzled. 1 year later, they did it again, and there was nothing, right? Hardly anybody showed up. To have a movement that's effective, you can't show up once a year. You can't even show up once a month. It needs to be constant, and it shouldn't be on weekends. Weekends don't disrupt anything. It needs to be during the week. I'll give you a success story. So in 2011, I'm making sure this is right. Yeah, it has to be right. In 2011, the Quebec provincial government voted to start imposing tuition on students. And so the university students began daily protests against the tuition. So then the Quebec government decided, in its infinite wisdom, to pass a law banning protest. So the people of Quebec decided they were going to join the students in protest. What they would do is every day after dinner, so sometime around 6 or 7 p.m., I went there one day and I saw it. I don't remember if it was 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. It was somewhere around there. I think it was 7 p.m. Everybody would walk out of their home and with pots and pans and just begin banging them. Bang, 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 bang. And they would just march up and down the street every day for like 1 hour. Bang, bang, bang. And they sustained this for weeks, turned into months. And then finally, the Quebec government collapsed. And a new government was voted in. And the new government's first act was to make protests legal again. And its second act was to abolish tuition. That's what democracy looks like. So for those of you who are like me, who spent a lot of their life in the United States, if you never saw it there, that's for sure. But there are places on the planet that experience it, like South Korea, Germany, Canada. It's not completely alien on the planet, just mostly in the United States. So I guess my advice is, the other piece is, so many of us go into these things with ego. And it's really hard to set your ego aside. But the more you do, the better off you are, and the better off your movement is. Ego is poison. Get rid of it. It's impossible to do, but that should still be the goal.
Yeah. If I can ask one more question, Didi, and then I'll move on to happily.
You sure can. Okay. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. So in terms of movements and marches and those type of things that we're seeing, I agree generally, and that's really, really helpful insight, just because it's difficult in America. Like, I was part of the BLM marches, and then here, like, I saw the encampments and whatnot, and it just all kind of fizzled and died. Like, we didn't build anything institutional, but there were kind of groundswells of movement. So like, some people see it in the unions, some people see it in like mutual aid organizations, like Food Not Bombs, like DSA growing up. Like, there are different types of developing, like I call them like kind of parallel power institutions, where we're trying to institutionalize and counter. And we're kind of learning from the alt-right on this, is it's not just you show up to a march, but also where you go eat, like what churches you go to, what rock bands you go to, like trying to build into culture, like subversive, powerful movements. Do you have any advice on that type of alternative power building? Because you talk a lot about like marches, which I really appreciate. But any insight you have on like how to do that and how to build like sustainable, effective institutions that are outside of like what the American institutions, especially when we're seeing kind of the social security net that would otherwise fill in those gaps, kind of being actively destroyed to some extent.
Yeah. This has always baffled me about the general attitude in the United States. So like, when I joined my union because I believe in unions, and and when I would talk to other professors, why don't you join the AFT? They would go, I don't think so. And I'm like, why? Is it because it's $48 a month? Like, is it going to really cut into your quality of life? What's the what's the hang up? And they go, I don't know. What benefit do I get out of it? And I go, well, you get no benefit if you don't join. But if you do join, the benefit that you have is there's more money going into the union. The union has more ability. And so the larger it gets, the more powerful it becomes, the better our negotiating ability becomes. So you do get a direct benefit from joining, and they still wouldn't do it. And so, like maybe ACC has 5-10% union membership, which is amazing. It's awful. I haven't figured out how to convince people to do things in their own best interest. Like, I think that's the first part. For a while I would go to DSA meetings, and some of the DSA meetings were really amazing. A lot of work got done, not necessarily external work, but a lot of internal work got done, like within the people within the activist community. And then there were some meetings that were like, I don't know what this was for or what this is about. So it's going to always be hit and miss, because that's just the nature of any type of organization. I think one of the problems that I saw with the left that I don't think the right suffers from as much is leftists tend to quibble more about the little details and get stuck on those little details. And I'm at the point in my life where I feel like I'm open to anything. Like, I am not certain about anything. I love doubt. Doubt is perfect. So I don't get the need to have it all pinned down and perfect. Like, I can't tell you how many times I ran into a person who was 21 and they would be like, well, did you read this part in Das Kapital? And it was like it was dogmatic and religious. And I'm like, no, who cares? I don't remember. I was your age when I read that. It was horrible. Who wants to read Das Kapital on purpose? So I think to the degree to which we can be less dogmatic, that would be practical and a good idea. And the extent to which you make being part of an organization enjoyable and pleasant, you're going to win. And I think that's what the right has gotten right? They've done a much better job of bringing people on board, getting them on the same page, and getting them to just sort of have fun, like shout and scream and hate, because hate is actually a lot of fun when you think about it. Having said that, I was in a meeting recently. I won't give details because I shouldn't. In February, where I was around a bunch of CEOs, and I started trying to sort of poke, because I was trying to figure out where they were on the Trump spectrum. And for the record, they're all Trumpkins. Like, it was, I don't think I ran into a single CEO who wasn't a Trumpkin. Like, one of them even said, I'm not a Trumpkin, but that Elon, if he's behind something, I'm behind it. And I was like, okay, so you're a Trumpkin. Sorry, my alarm is going off.
Hold on one second, guys. Dr. Casagranda, if you go away from the screen, we can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so one of the things that those CEs did say was that they were horrified that the rise of the far right would trigger a rise of the far left. And I thought, you're not actually scared of the far right. It's the far left reaction that you're worried about, or a far left response that you're worried about. Okay, I got it. So for what it's worth, all these little protests that have been popping up, the sustained and unsustained movements, DSA, all of that is on their radar, and they are nervous and they are panicked. And so it made me feel good.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Those are really helpful answers. I'll let other people move on. But thank you so much, Doctor.
We're going to go down the list. Dangerous, you're up. Dangerous?
Yes, hello?
Yep.
Yes.
Did you want to ask a question to Dr. Casagranda?
Yeah, I wanted to ask him about the Egyptian revolution, 2011. If you want to tell us about how that, because we all think, it's we don't know, I don't know a lot about that. If you can tell us about that, I would love that.
I mean, I can give you a little bit of information on it, sure. So I was in Egypt in December of 2010 and January 2011, right before everything started. So, so if you watch the news in Egypt and you're around people, it's really hard to watch the news. In fact, it's true for movies too, because Egyptians can't stop talking. Like, this is just a thing Egyptians love to do. So you're watching a movie and everybody's talking. The news would come on and it would show scenes from Tunisia, because the Arab Spring started in Tunisia in December of 2010. Everybody would go silent. It was freaky. I had never seen that before. I had never seen Egyptians go, oh, wait, I'm going to pay attention to the TV instead of talking to the person sitting next to me. By the way, I actually think that's healthy. I don't have a problem with it. I just think it was a indicator to me that something really interesting was happening. And as I was encountering more and more people and just sort of getting a lay of the land and seeing where people were with the protests taking place in Tunisia, I don't remember exactly when. It was right before New Year's, so December 29 or something like that. I turned to my wife and I said, I think this Tunisia thing is going to spread across the Middle East and it's going to turn into a pan-Arab revolution. And she was like, you're an idiot. I still hold this against her. In any case, what happened was, of course, Tunisia went down after 30 days. The Tunisian government. Nobody could believe it because this tyranny in Tunisia had been around for 18 years, and the assumption was that there was no way to unseat this thing. And it inspired everybody, the whole planet, not just the Middle East, because all of a sudden people started thinking, man, I could take out my tyranny as well. And I think it was exactly a week or roughly a week after the Tunisian government went down, the protests began in Egypt. So it started on Tuesday, which may be bad timing. One of the things that the organizers realized was they had been watching what happened with the Green Movement in Iran in 2009. So the Green Movement protesters in Iran would go and they would occupy a square, like the main intersection in Tehran or whichever city they were protesting in. And then as evening rolled on and it was time for dinner, they would go home, they would eat, and then, the next day they would go to that spot, and the police and the military had it cordoned off. So there was no way to get onto that spot. And then they would take the second best spot in the city and occupy it that evening or that day. And then they'd go home for dinner, and when they'd go back the next day, they would find that the military and the police had cordoned off that spot. And so after a few weeks of doing this, the Iranian protesters found themselves in little alleyways jammed in, completely ineffective, because the police literally would just, chunk after chunk of the city, they would just cordon it off until they got it so that the protesters had nowhere to go. And that and occasional assassinations and imprisonment killed that movement. So the Egyptian protesters decided that they were going to permanently occupy Meydan Tahrir, which, if you've ever been in Cairo, it's the heart of Cairo. So they went and they would take shifts, right? Because it's hard for a person to be in a spot for 24 hours. Obviously, there were some people who pulled that off, but most people needed to go to work or they had children. So people would take shifts, and then if you couldn't go at all, you would bring food and you would bring water. And the idea was that they would just control Meydan Tahrir every day, 24/7, until the government collapsed. And when they did this, on Tuesday, the police showed up, and the police began battling the protesters. And it was grim. The protesters were in really big trouble, and it didn't look like they were going to be able to hold on to it. I remember, we had already come back to the United States. We had missed the Arab Spring in Egypt by 1 week. And I got in my car, I turned on the engine, and NPR pops up, and I hear that it's spread to Egypt. And I got out of my car, and ran back inside and told my wife, jumped in my car, went to work. And on the way, I called travel agent to see if I could get a ticket to Egypt. and decided that I couldn't afford to do it. So not monetarily, but because I figured I'd lose my job. So what happened was the soccer hooligans showed up. And the soccer hooligans, for those of you who don't know, there's Zamalek and Ahli. Those are the two main teams. They hate the soccer hooligans for those teams. Like, Zamalek usually loses. So Ahli wins. And so the Zamalkawi attack the Ahlawi because they're pissed because their team lost. But if Zamalek won, the Zamalkawi would attack the Ahlawi because they're happy because their team won. It's just an excuse to fight each other. They both sides showed up at Maidan Tahrir, and they basically bowed to each other and attacked the police. And Wednesday, Thursday, just rolling battles with the soccer hooligans and the protesters. And it was just enough that the protesters could get to Friday. And then after the Friday morning prayers, a million people showed up, and now it became impossible for the police to do anything about it. By that Saturday, the protesters were no longer being beaten by the police. They were actively looking for the police. The police became a target. Police stations became a target. So within about 5 days, the police in Egypt were effectively neutralized, and the government was forced to bring in the military. When the military showed up, the protesters showed up with Egyptian flags and flowers and candy and Coca-Colas, and they were like handing them out to the army, as if the army was their heroes saving the day, as opposed to the replacement for the police. And it showed the Egyptian attitude towards the army and the Egyptian attitude towards the police. They hated the police, and they saw the army as their protector and their liberator. And so there was a really interesting conundrum, right, for the military, because it saw itself as the protector of the Egyptian people. And I want to say it was day 14, but that could be wrong, give or take a couple of days. I was watching a live stream from Maidan Tahrir on BBC. It's just a camera going. It wasn't, nothing interesting was going on other than you could just see the people protesting. All of a sudden, the tankers, because right, there were tanks on the street. The tank commanders, who had their heads sticking up out of the turrets, pulled their helmets off. There's like 3 or 4 guys pulling their helmets off at the same time. You're like, what is this, coordinated? And they whipped out their cell phones, and they're talking on their cell phone. And you're like, there's a communication device built into the helmet. There's no reason to ever take your helmet off if you're talking to, another person in the military. And then that's it. That's all you saw. And so, I registered it as really weird because it was, and then forgot about it. A few weeks or maybe a few days, I don't remember, after Hosni Mubarak's government toppled, the BBC put out a story on what had happened. Apparently, the officers in command of those tanks had been given the order to kill the people, to kill the protesters. And what they did was they called their fathers, right? Because like most militaries on earth, there's a little bit of a hereditariness to officers. The children of officers frequently become the next generation of officers. They called their dads and they said, I got the order to kill the protesters. What do I do? And their fathers apparently had told them, you protect the Egyptian people. You can't attack the Egyptian people. Ignore the order. And they did. And that's effectively what destroyed the Mubarak's chance of staying in power in that moment. And then, of course, the government did a coup d'etat on him on day 18 and took him out because they realized there was no way to keep him in power anymore. That something had to go. And the military wasn't going to let itself go, so it took him out. So that's the 18 days in a nutshell. It's obviously not an intense, detailed account, but the big moments, the big events in any case.
Do you think Zionists had any involvement in this at all? Is there any indication of it? Especially the coup.
I think it would be naive to assume. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The coup part? Like the military coup part?
You mean to take out Mubarak?
Yeah. No. To take out
I would think
the Muslim
that
Brotherhood.
if I were a Zionist, I wouldn't want Mubarak to go
No, the Muslim
I might
Brotherhood.
want Bashar al-Assad to go. What
Yeah,
about
the
the Muslim
Muslim.
Brotherhood?
Yeah, so the Muslim Brotherhood when they
Oh, you mean the
got
2013 coup where they took out Morsi?
yeah, was his name Morsi?
Yeah, I
No,
mean,
his name
so
wasn't
I
Morsi.
think it would Mohammed Morsi?
Guys, what
Are you
was his
talking about
name?
the
The
so
leader of the
in
Muslim Brotherhood
2000?
Yeah, it
who
was
got
Morsi.
elected. Oh, it was Morsi. My bad. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My bad. Yes, Morsi.
It's okay. So he was elected on July 3rd, 2012, and then he was toppled on July 3rd, 2013. He had a 365-day
Yes.
administration.
Yes. Do you think the Zionist was
So it would be
involved?
extremely in taking him out.
Any
So
way,
I don't
shape, or
know. I
form?
don't
Because
have
the
any
Muslim
evidence.
Brotherhood is a huge ally for the Palestinians. That's a huge threat if they get power in Egypt for Israel, no?
I don't know. So from what I could tell, and of course this is analysis from distance, so it's difficult. You know, I'm relying on sources in Egypt. I'm relying on news sources, and you know how that goes. From what I could tell, Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood made a lot of mistakes, and then on top of that, the Fulul, the faction of Egyptians who are crony capitalists who had backed the Mubarak administration, they had enough power that they could do things like power outages, and so what they did was they from within kept sabotaging the infrastructure, the Egyptian infrastructure. And I think by the time the year was over, the Egyptian people were done with Morsi, and they saw him as incompetent. They were frustrated by the damage done to the economy. And so maybe the Israelis had something to do with it. I just have never seen any evidence of it. Having said that, I think it'd be extremely naive to assume that the Israelis didn't at least try to do something, because they always seem to have their hand in everything. And the Mossad has been a very effective tool against its neighbors. At least there seems to always be a spy somewhere. But yeah, it's possible. I just don't. I think that Morsi was incompetent enough, and the Brotherhood didn't know what it was doing, and then the Fulul were vicious enough that they managed to. They could have easily have done it without Israel's help, and then the army too. Honestly. I think the biggest mistake was in the way the Egyptians set up the election. They should have done something like a single transferable vote system instead of the system they did use, which was runoff elections. But they didn't consult me, so they made a mistake. I would have told them single transferable vote.
Awesome. And I'm just going to make a moderation announcement, guys. Please, no face gifts at all. And I want to also, yeah, I don't know. I think this is your first live stream. Is that right, Dr. Casagranda?
It is, yeah, on TikTok.
Yeah, we get pretty wild. The gifts here are very animated. TikTok makes it fun. But with that, I'm going to go to Abu Adam, who is a
Yeah.
enormous
If I can just
fan.
get one more question, please.
Sure.
Thank you so much. So, like non-traditional actors, like the hooligans you spoke about in Egypt, and giving the media outrage we're experiencing today, with Palestine and Israel and all this censoring. Do you think that it takes these groups to kind of reach something here, like non-factor actors? Or am I English?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Yes. So like groups like hooligans
you're doing
or
great.
like in Morocco, right? They made a huge impact. You know what I mean? Like it's not about condoning or condemning. It's just this like just random groups that just pop up and influence politics, right? And with the media
those
being
types
very
of groups
censored right
definitely
now.
matter. The soccer hooligans in Egypt were eventually declared to be a terrorist organization, and the government went after them because they became proponents of a democracy. They became politically radicalized. It's actually strange to think about, right? Like, what transformed a group of guys who just wanted to beat each other up into how do we make the world a better place? I can think of lots of other examples where there was an organization out there that, was a non-traditional organization that you didn't expect to do something that then eventually turned into something. So yeah, for sure. The more people organize, this is why I like unions. I think the more people organize, and then in the case of unions, you're organizing around labor rights, the more influence you're going to have. The less organized people are, the less influence they're going to have. My fear, obviously, is that the right does the same thing. So you have organizations on the right that are, and right now it feels like the right is winning this battle, that the left has been left behind. I'm still trying to figure out what the Democratic Party is doing. Like, they had, for the last 8 years, they've had one job, and it was to stop Donald Trump, and they've completely failed at their one job that they had. And, after he did a failed coup d'etat attempt in January 6, 2021, I would have thought, I had been told my whole life, if you do a coup d'etat, you get shot by firing squad. I'm still trying to figure out when that's going to take place. The Democratic Party couldn't convince the American people that a guy who attempted a coup d'etat was bad. That's epic fail. So it would have been really amazing if there had been some kind of organization on the side that was organizing and pushing for this. It never happened. I think because people thought rule of law will take hold. And for years, there's been a cadre of people on the left going, there's no rule of law in the United States. It's just about who has the money and the power and the influence. There's no equality. It's all illusion. And I guess we kind of found out, but maybe a little late. It's a little disappointing.
I could not agree more. I have so many more questions. Thank you so much for answering my questions, but I'll let other people go. And thank you so much for being with us. I'm a huge fan.
W dangerous.
And we love you so much. And you're a great thinker.
W dangerous, guys. Abu
Thank you.
Adam,
I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties.
No. Don't be sorry. Trust me. You know what? It happens. I am so thankful that you're here now. And we are going to go through the panel. I'm not sure what timing looks like for you, given the late start. Do you have time for
I'm
the
okay
panel
right
to
now.
go
I
through?
probably have to wrap up in maybe 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay, got it. So guys, we're going to try to keep it to one question each after that, but go ahead, Abu Adam.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't know if I want to say biggest fan, but I could say I'm your biggest fan. People sit back and watch movies and Netflix. I sit back and listen to you, Professor. So I love the way you give history. I'm a big history.
I'm so sorry. Why? Why are you doing this to yourself?
I just love it. No, it's amazing. Every time I watch you, I learn something new. It's amazing the way you explain history. I love it, and I really appreciate it. The question I have, like everyone's saying, I got thousands of questions I can have. But one question I want to go back to, since you always talk about ancient history, which is what I love, and I want to connect it to modern day in Gaza. Do you think there's any way for an occupied people, like we see in Gaza, them being occupied by the Zionist regime for over 75 years, other than fighting back? Because us always, when we speak to them, they always give us, why don't you surrender? Why don't you remove Hamas? If you lay down your weapons, it's your fault. The basic, it's if you would only give up your weapons, we would, you would be free. But I've never seen in history an occupied people being freed without a fight. Do you think this is possible in Gaza? And is it correct to fight back, in your opinion, seeing what, how history always repeats itself?
Yeah, so based on history, I cannot think of a single event where a crushed population liberated itself with no violence. Like, it just doesn't happen. People will point to India, but India is really a false thought. There were 60,000 British soldiers holding on to how many hundreds of millions of Indians. So at the end of the day, what Gandhi basically had was a threat of violence behind him that he was holding back, and he made it clear that if he let go, there would be a bunch of violence. So even then, the reality is that the threat of violence won the day. Unfortunately, when a population is conquered, they're not conquered because the guys conquering were nice guys, right? There's no such thing as an empire or a conquest that was built on kindness. Now, there have been points in time in history where the conquered population was treated well. It doesn't happen often, but I can give you examples of it. Usually, of course, the goal with the conquered population is to take their land, their labor, their wealth, their resources. And of course, what's happened in Palestine is no exception to that. This was not a kind conquest. If anything, the events of the last year and a half have taught us is that without the violence, the rest of the world ignores it. And, you know, even though there were definitely protests against what Israel was doing prior to October 7, there was nothing like what we've seen sustained over the course of the last 18 months. And the reality is that the world's opinion has been changed on a really large scale to the point where we're now seeing European states stand up and denounce what Israel has been doing, right? Norway, Spain, Ireland, and the Czech Republic have become critics of Israel. When was the last time you heard European states carve out a space where they're criticizing? We've seen Germany abstain on votes, which is, that's almost anathema to the German state, because post-World War II, Germany made the claim that its right to exist is linked to Israel's right to exist. And so Germany and Austria did the same. They sort of accepted Zionism as their way of compensating for the Holocaust. And now we're starting to see Germany hesitate. And so that's a serious fissure. Hesitate on votes in the UN. Obviously, the police in Germany are still beating up pro-Palestinian protesters. That hasn't changed. And the same is true in Austria. But we've at least seen a shift taking place in Europe that wasn't possible before what happened on October 7th. So while what happened on October 7th was horrific, and what's happened since was horrific, it's reinforced the reality, which is that if you are being defeated, you are conquered, you must respond with violence, because it's the only way you can get anybody's attention. Just like the Polish resistance forces in World War II, or the French resistance in World War II, or the resistance from the Partizani in Yugoslavia in World War II. The reality is you don't liberate yourself with kindness. That's just not an option. And in the case of Palestine-Israel, for the record, there's no military solution. Every once in a while I hear like, somebody needs to just get involved militarily. Like, no, Israel has the nuke. There's no end game that's a military end game. But if the Palestinian population doesn't resist, the Israelis will happily genocide them and exterminate them and take their land. So the reality is they have to resist, and that resistance only can take place through violence, which is stupid. I hate the fact that we're even in this place. The tragedy of the whole thing is if the Israelis would just do what apartheid South Africa did and sit down and negotiate, because they have so much power in this moment, they could get an amazing deal. And then you create a one-state solution, even if it's majority Palestinian, the Israelis would be able to retain enormous economic and political power in such a situation because they have most of the cards. And so the fact that they're choosing to do violence instead of negotiating is really foolish. It makes me worry that at some point down the road, Israel will reach a point where it's not sustainable, and there's going to be another global refugee crisis, another round of needless violence. But I don't know. History loves to repeat itself, so I guess we're stuck in stupid land. So that's my answer. How's that? Is that good?
I love it. Amazing. And just a last question to add on to that. Would you say if we're on the brink of World War III, and if in the coming years it does start, however that war is, would you say that people can say in history that this started on October 7th? Like when we speak on World War III, if it comes in the near future, seeing what's happening with Europe, China, Russia, the US, how they're trying to shift to to Europe away from U.S. weapons, from what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've had a few World War III near misses in the past, right? During the Bangladesh's revolution to break away from Pakistan, the United States and the Soviet Union came actually shockingly close to going at it. U.S. was sending an aircraft carrier group up the Bay of Bengal, and the Russians had set up a submarine line across the Bay of Bengal, and the Russians said if this aircraft carrier group crosses, we're going to try and sink it. And the United States said, if you do, it's World War III. And the only thing that stopped it from happening was Pakistan surrendered at the last moment. We had a potential World War III scenario in 1973 with the 1973 war, but the Nixon administration decided that it was going to abandon Israel if Israel triggered the Soviet Union intervening in the war. So we got lucky there because the Nixon administration had decided, probably because, they were thinking, can we really do the Vietnam War and World War III? It just feels like we're already losing one war. In 1962, we came shockingly close to, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, to World War III breaking out. Having said that, those were all kind of one-off incidences. There was a lot of danger on either side of those moments for sure, but the trigger moment was there was a crisis, and then the actors on either side of the crisis were responding to the crisis in a way that ramped up the crisis. In the current situation, we just don't know. And the reason we don't know is because Trump's style of rule is chaos creating, right? He'll make an announcement that he's going to do something, and then at the last minute he backs away, or he'll make an announcement he's going to do something, and then he tries to do it, and he threatens his allies, and he's constantly creating this volume of nonsensical statements. So you don't know what he's going to do. You don't know why he's doing it. There's no incentive for the other side to work with him because they know that he's usually bluffing. In that kind of a scenario, I think the risk of World War III is extremely high just because the circumstances are unpredictable. The actors on each side aren't necessarily rational actors. In the case of, Putin, he's looking at the end of his life. He's trying to figure out if he can rebuild the Soviet Union before he dies. He's failed miserably by attacking Ukraine the second round, right? Because really the Ukraine war started in 2014. So since you brought up this idea of World War III, it's worthwhile maybe looking at World War II. In the lead up to World War II, there were multiple wars breaking out all around the planet. The Spanish had a civil war. The Italians invaded Ethiopia. The Italians attacked Albania, right? There's wars breaking out all around the planet. And in the process, by the way, for World War I, the same thing, right? Bulgaria was caught itself on the winning side in the first Balkans War and on the losing side on the second Balkans War. So in that way, what we're seeing with Ukraine, what we're seeing with Palestine feels like the kind of precursor wars that you saw before World War II broke out or World War I broke out. So yeah, it's unnerving. All it takes is one guy to make a miscalculation in this situation. And the fact that the president of the United States has a 70 IQ makes it much more likely that there will be a miscalculation. Right? If you do policy analysis, there's externalities and internalities. Internalities are foreseen outcomes, and externalities are unforeseen outcomes. And externalities increase when the IQ of your leadership is lower. I can't tell you how many times I'm shocked when somebody goes, "I didn't think that would be the result," and it's like, why? Did you not have a brain? How did you not know this was going to be the result? Maybe you should think things through before you start doing policies. So that makes it really dangerous. I think it's also alarming that Japan and Germany are remilitarizing. When Germany is done remilitarizing, it will have the third largest military on the planet. It will go United States, China, Germany, Russia. Russia will be fourth. Japan already has 2 aircraft carriers. There is no reason on earth, if you're in defense, to have an aircraft carrier when you're an island state, right? Japan is already three really big aircraft carriers. So it doesn't need an aircraft carrier. And so it's people that we've sort of written off are now coming back in as big military players. That also increases the instability, especially because that Japan and Germany are secretly working on getting the nuke. Because at this point, I think it would be really dumb for you not to have the nuke. Like, I think everybody should have the nuke. Like, give it to Trinidad and Tobago. Like, just get the nuke, because it's the best way to stop people from attacking you in a world where there's no law. The other thing that's on the table, I keep hearing talked about, is the possibility of a U.S. civil war. And the fact that we're talking about World War III and we're talking about a civil war also show the instability of the situation we're in. Because the more you talk about it, the more likely it is that it'll happen, because the more normalized it becomes in people's mind. But why are people talking about it? Well, because it had already become normalized in people's minds. In other words, it's a bit of this feedback loop. And that's alarming. We shouldn't be in this position right now. It's 2025, and I have to admit, in 1990, I assumed the world in 2025 was going to be a lot different than it is. I feel like we've gone backwards, not forwards. And I blame a lot of that on Bush Jr., Bush Sr., and Bill Clinton. I think those three presidencies were absolute catastrophes. Maybe I'm maddest at Bill Clinton because I expected more from him. Junior, right? We expected every day we woke up and the world was still around. We'd be like, oh, okay, it wasn't bad. We're still alive. This is good. But it's like Trump. People forgot how bad Junior was, but he was horrible. So that's the other thing too. Can we stop with the amnesia and try to remember things a little better? I don't know. Maybe we should tattoo it on our arm or something, dude. Oh, Bush was bad. That's right. I forgot. Something.
Didi, can I ask a really short question? Just following up immediately on that, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a long list of people, but yes, absolutely. Go for it.
Great. So sorry. Just on that, I agree. And I've been sitting forever being like, the new fascists are crazy and scary and doing all the same old fascist stuff. Right. But what's also really interesting is that they're different. Right. Where the old fascists had better fashion. Right. They had Prada. Now, so I guess just really quickly, what is the new stuff that you're seeing with these fascists that is confusing or new or unexpected, right? They're not doing big infrastructure projects like old fascists did. Is there any insight as how we can understand that, or what's different about it? Because that was a big thing that fascists did a while ago, and now they're kind of skipping that step.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's an interesting point. What's shocking about what the new fascists are doing compared to the old fascists is they've got the same base. It's that population of people who thought they were going to be better off, who are actually the base for the left. Right? They're working class people who you would have expected to go vote for a socialist, but they went over and voted for the fascists because the fascists had simplified things, and that's exactly what's happened with this round of fascists. So in that way, they're definitely the same. I guess I'm trying to think of what makes them different. I feel like, one of the weird things is you hear Hitler talk, you can see how somebody might get sucked into it because he really had a style. It was hard to agree with anything he said, but you could see how, he openly said in a speech, we are an intolerant people. We embrace intolerance. Intolerance is good. You're like, oh, you don't hear the right saying that kind of thing now. They're openly, obviously, behind closed doors, they're saying it to each other. But I feel like the level of speech making is not at that. It's not the quality that it was back then. When I hear Trump speak, I'm baffled. I don't get how anybody's interested in what he's saying. And what he says is just nonsensical stuff like, this is going to be the best ever. It's the biggest. It's going to be really special. He just sounds like a con artist. And I don't get why anybody would be tricked by that other than, bad public schools. So I think that's one of the big differences, is that these guys they don't have the same kind of charisma as that round from 92 years ago. And
Awesome.
you're right,
And
they don't have the big projects in mind.
the watching and listening to Trump is a whole level of insanity. I mean, the Gulf of America, the 51st state, the 52nd first state. I mean, at this point, I don't know where we're going anymore. I really don't. I kind of give up. United States of America, let's just go plant a flag, I guess. I wanted to go to Mustafa and Freckles.
Yeah.
Welcome to the panel, brother.
Hey, what's going on? Long time no see to a lot of people. First off, man, Roy, love your videos. I know everybody's been saying it. It's just going to sound like a record on repeat. Watch your videos all the time. I love your take on history. I do have. I'm gonna pull a little bit of a card here, since I haven't been on TikTok in a minute. I just have two quick questions. I know that you can extrapolate for long periods of time, but I do want to try to be as fair for your remaining time to the people that do have questions that are waiting. First question, very simply. What do you see when looking at the situation of what's been going on with the conversation about Palestine and about liberation for the Palestinians against the Zionist occupation? What do you see with the Overton window shifting? Do you think that there's any kind of realistic line or finish line that can be in view? And if so, what would be necessary for us to be able to reach that, right? Domestically, because I know a lot of people, especially as they become more informed with what's going on in Palestine, it's kind of making them have a notion of this needs to change now, right? That's the whole purpose as to why we've seen this emboldening of the Palestinian movement. So if there is something where a direction needs to be shifted in the movement, what would you recommend it to be, and how would we be able to accomplish the goal of the, eventual liberation of the Palestinian people?
I mean, this is the number one question I think everybody's asking themselves. I don't have a real answer. Like, I wish I did. Let's just do this. What happened last time was, I want to say it was 1980, 1981. P.W. Botha decided, maybe it was even 79, P.W. Botha decided to redo the South African state. So he created a tricameral system. So there was a parliament for the whites, a parliament for the coloreds. If you feel like I'm being racist, that's the official name that they use for the mixed race people in South Africa. People from South Africa and Zimbabwe who are in that category will identify themselves as colored. So I know it doesn't sound good in the United States, but in Southern Africa, it's normal. And then there was a third parliament for Asians. And there was no parliament for the majority black population. So it was kind of an interesting setup, right? And then the way bills had to go was they had to be passed in all three parliaments to become law. But then if they didn't get passed in all three parliaments, they went to a panel, and the panel could pass the law without having gone through all three parliaments when that panel was majority white. So basically, they still kept majority white rule. They just gave the colored population and the Asian population a little bit of a say. And this was an attempt to reimagine apartheid and try and make it salvageable. F.W. de Klerk becomes the leader of South Africa. By 1987, it became obvious that there was no way to save the state, the apartheid state. And what they did was they began secret negotiations with the ANC. And the secret negotiations were, how can we come out, let's say in 7 years, because that's when it happens, with enough security and safety for the white population and wealth, sustain as much of the wealth as we can for the white population, that we will be able to surrender and make this work. To get to that point in 1987, it required the South African economy to stall out. And to get to that point, a bunch of countries around the planet had to divest, and people had to boycott buying South African products. In other words, the weak spot South Africa had was its economy. Mm-hmm. Israel doesn't quite have that weakness because the United States and Europe send it money directly.
Right. And that's
So you would have to not only break Israel's economy, but you'd have to stop the funding.
right. So that segues.
Mustafa?
That segues quickly into my second question, which is if it is based on the idea of divestment, which obviously, I mean, I think everybody kind of knew that. I think that was a very obvious question. How in the West would we, and not just in America, but also Western European countries, how are we capable of being able to accomplish that as a real goal, right? When we understand the predatorial nature of Israeli lobbying groups and the predatorial aspect of the relationship between the Israeli intelligence services, such as Mossad, along with our intelligence services, even in as most recently released documentation, such as like the JFK files, right? How do we actually break past this idea of it's almost like there's a physical occupation that's going on over in Palestine, but we also see a indirect or almost shadowy immaterial form of occupation that's occurring within the West and on our own domestic front? How do we break through that ceiling to be able to actually make the change occur that we want to see?
Yeah, that's tough. Like one of the questions I like to ask Zionists are Palestinians human? And if they are human, then do they deserve human rights? That doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work, but I still like to ask the question, is because the level of cognitive dissonance that they've built up around the argument allows them to divorce themselves from the idea that they're being cruel to another human being. So one of the problems that I've experienced in the United States, especially with the white population in the United States, is that there is this really profound attachment to, I deserve this, that God gave me this, whatever it is, this job I don't deserve because I'm actually a mediocre person. I got it through white privilege, this land that I got through inheritance, this wealth I got through inheritance. There's this disconnect that especially white people have from how the United States became the wealthy state that it is. First, we stole the land from the Native Americans, then we enslaved African and Native American populations, and then we brought in poor immigrants and exploited their labor, and then we bombed the hell out of third world countries and stole resources from them. Like, we're not the good guys. And the fact of the matter is everybody wants to believe they're the good guy. And I think one of the reasons why the United States is so interested in Israel, because it's obsessed, right? There's like a mental illness issue here. Is because it sees Israel as kindred spirit, stole the land from somebody else, exploits cheap labor from the Palestinian population, brings in workers from overseas and pays them little so they can exploit their labor. It feels like a kindred spirit thing. I also believe, and I think this is worth exploring, that one of the reasons why the United States likes Israel is one of the reasons why Europe likes Israel. As long as there's an Israel, then a lot of the Jewish people who would have otherwise lived in the United States or Europe don't. In other words, that there's a huge piece of anti-Semitism that the United States and Europe hide behind. Because think about it, Germany, it's one of its pieces of its raison d'etre, right, is that Israel must exist. But why? Those Ashkenazi Jews could simply move back to Germany. And at the end of the day, I think it's this belief that, well, we don't necessarily want that. For the record, if you are Ashkenazi, you can get German citizenship instantaneously. Germany has openly said it wants its Jewish population back, but at the same time then supports the state of Israel to keep that from happening on a large scale. I don't know how to do this, but somehow you have to break through the cognitive dissonance and make people realize that all of this, if a person says I'm a Zionist, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not anti-Semitic. There's this miscommunication. If somebody says I'm anti-Zionist, that doesn't mean they're anti-Semitic. And I think if you can break that linkage somehow and convince people that this has nothing to do with that, these are two separate issues here, then I think it'll help the argument a little bit. But again, how do you overcome cognitive dissonance? I think cognitive dissonance might be more powerful than the strong nuclear, weak nuclear, gravity, electromagnetic, and compounded interest. I think cognitive dissonance might just be, with ignorance, of course, the most powerful forces in the universe.
So effectively, what I hear. Which, I mean, this is kind of always been my perception on it, so it doesn't really seem that there's a different view that I'm getting from you, is that it really does come down to kind of what we are doing with pushing the conversations, engaging in argumentation with people, and trying to at least show them where the logical flaws are within their ways of thinking, whether it be through some indoctrinated manner of what they've been told is normal or acceptable or should be the case, or whether it's holding a notion out of fear because they don't want to be labeled as being hateful. And that's pretty much what we're doing on this app, at least as long as y'all haven't changed up on me since I've been gone. That's pretty much what the main focus has been on.
That's the main focus.
Yeah, with the conversations that we're having on here. So it's really just kind of keep doing as we've been doing effectively.
And we're gonna see if we have time, but we do have a Zionist on the panel, but he's gonna go last. He has to pay his jizya of a lion or say free Palestine. But Luffy, you're next, brother.
Hey, Roy Casagranda, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Actually, the question I wanted to ask you, Will and Mustafa have covered quite well, so I'll just go into my backup question, which is what parallels can be drawn between the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the current situation in Gaza, considering the atrocities inflicted by the Yazidis on Jewish people, such as the chambers, the chemical, booms like weapons, and the actions of Israel against Palestinians today, especially in Gaza. How do these forms of violence compare? While the Yazidi era horrors were carried out in secrecy, today's attacks, including the use of, the chemical phosphorus booms and 2,000-pound booms as well, are happening in full view of the world.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is a myth about World War II is that the world didn't know what was happening. It's true that the kind of information that people had back then was minimal compared to what we have now. But there was definitely some information out there. Like, one of the things that the United States says, the United States at no point ever bombed any of the infrastructure around the Holocaust. So they never bombed a railroad track leading to a concentration camp or a death camp. The United States never bombed a concentration camp or a death camp. There was no attempt to intervene militarily, and it could have easily been done. And you go, well, would it have accelerated the end of the war? Yeah, just as easily as blowing up civilian infrastructure, which the United States definitely did. And the reason I'm saying that is because think about it. If you blow up a train or a railroad track, you've just taken that really important infrastructure out of the war effort for the Germans. So there was a definite incentive to do this, and the United States chose not to. And the United States for years it claimed that it didn't know what was going on. But I've seen archived photos of Auschwitz where they had each part of Auschwitz labeled. So they clearly knew exactly what was going on. And so there's this constant thing of claiming ignorance where there wasn't one. And of course, there were Germans who lived near concentration camps who claimed they had no idea what was happening. And that's one of the reasons why Eisenhower ordered that the population of Germans that were living near the concentration camps had to go into them to see them, because his goal was to sort of break them out of this self delusion of, no, I didn't know. And maybe some of them truly didn't, but let's be honest, probably the majority of them knew. They were just in denial about it, right? They did cognitive dissonance. They just separated themselves from the facts and walked away. There's no way you didn't know something was up. In the case of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, there were tunnels. The Nazis definitely used flamethrowers and demolition charges against the population. They referred to them as rats. They referred to them as animals. There are lots of really painful parallels between how the Nazis responded to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and what's happening in Gaza. One of the interesting parallels is a huge reason why the Jewish uprising took place in Warsaw in 1943 was that they realized they were going to be sent to their death. That extermination was a done deal. So what they decided they were going to do was they were going to make it so that their death meant something. In other words, they didn't expect to win. Their goal was to go out on their own terms. And in a way, that's exactly what the Palestinian population, I think, was thinking in this latest round of violence was, we're finished. How do we go out on our own terms? And it's horrific that we're in this situation today. But that's the power of racism and nationalism. Nationalism is the cancer of the planet. If we could somehow get rid of it, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Casagranda. I'm a big fan as well, like everybody else here. And I just found out today that my dad actually used to work for a company that you worked for out there, like a Middle East American company. But yeah, at the same time, probably you were there as well. But yeah, thanks for your time. And I'll leave the panel open for the other guests.
W. Luffy all day, every day. Bella Love, did you have Dr. Casgrande, I just want to do a quick time check. There are so many people that want to talk to you. I'm going to beg you to come back for another session if that's okay. But do we still have, are we still okay on time?
Hopefully this is all sorted out. I won't have the problems. I can go a little bit longer, yeah.
Thank you so much. Bella Love, did you have a question?
Yes, I'll make it quick. So what do you think is the most under-discussed factor in Middle Eastern geopolitics that should get more attention, especially when it comes to the Zionist entity and what's going on?
I guess the question I find myself asking, and I don't get how people make this make sense in their head, is, are Palestinians human beings? And if the answer is yes, then how can you justify what's happened to them? And I think one of the things people need to remember is what's happened to them hasn't been 18 months, it's been 77 years. This didn't just happen. This has been 3/4 of a century, right? And I think people sort of keep wanting to frame this as, well, it's just the last 18 months. It's just, no, you just forgot about the previous 75 and a half years. It's not that there wasn't anything going on. It's like the Ukraine war. People keep going, we've just entered the third year. And it's like, no, Ukraine was attacked in 2014. You can't skip that first 8 years. It's actually 11 years old. I know we do this compartmentalization to try to make things make sense in our heads because it simplifies things. The problem is the world isn't simple. It's complicated and it's messy. Imagine if there was a country in Europe that was occupied by another country that kept getting bombed regularly. And then the country that was doing this to this one place bombed its neighbors as well. Like, people would be outraged. They would be appalled. They would be talking about how Poland needs to be liberated from oh, wait, that did happen. That was World War II. Oh, it is happening. It's the Ukraine war. So, right, we have this double standard where we pay attention to it when it's happening to people we identify as white, although technically, according to U.S. race law, Arabs are white, which I think is hilarious because you don't get any of the protections of a minority, but you get all the discrimination because nobody identifies Arabs as whites except for the law. So at the end of the day, we don't seem to. There was that journalist in the British, I think he was a British journalist. He was in Kyiv when the war ramped up in 2022. So not when the war started, but when it got ramped up. And he said, you don't expect to see this in a civilized place. You expect to see this in a place like Baghdad or Afghanistan. And I was like, wow, you just summarized and encapsulated the type of racism that's the underlying factor in making people not pay attention and not care. So I don't know. I don't know how you push back against that.
Thank you so much for that. Kelsey, I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to plow through at this point so I can get everybody heard. We're still waiting for the jizya from the Zionists, but go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay, I'll try to make this as quick as possible. But first of all, saying that I'm a massive fan is an understatement. If you look at my YouTube, like history, there's like hours of your like recorded lectures. But anyway, so here on TikTok,
I'm so sorry.
we have dozens of lives every single day, and at least once per live, we hear from Zionists and pro-Israelis that the Palestinian people are not indigenous to that land, that they either come from Egypt or they come from Jordan or they originate from the Arabian Peninsula. So I just wanted to know what you had to say about that statement and how you would rebuttal that statement.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange statement. So I guess are they saying that there was no Nakba, like there was no mass migration of people out of Palestine during the Israeli conquest? They're not saying that. They're saying, oh, those were just Egyptians and Jordanians who were fleeing. I don't even, it's so illogical and it's so random that it doesn't even make sense. I guess the feeling that I have is if a Cherokee comes up to you and says, you know, my house used to be on this land that your house is now, or a Lipan Apache, are you going to hand over your house and go, oh, my bad, I'm so sorry. Let me move back to Europe. I'm sure Germany will let me right back in. Ireland has plenty of room. I don't understand the argument. The argument is that something happened thousands of years ago, and now the population that's there doesn't have a right to be there. It seems really, really strange. So, okay, what else are we going to roll back? The Turks are originally from Mongolia, so I guess we have to move them back to Mongolia. And the Greek population that was in Turkey wasn't indigenous either, so it's not like we can bring Greeks in. We're going to have to figure out how we bring back the Carians and the Lydians and the Paphlagonians. Like, I don't know what we do. Like, their languages are dead. It's going to be complicated. One of the problems with the right is always looking to some point in the past where they think it was the ideal world. So for the United States, it's the 1800s when there was slavery and women couldn't vote and we were actively genociding Native Americans running around in cowboy hats. For the Nazis, it's, you know, sometime around the year 1000 when people are running around with lances and armor and killing each other in jousting matches. For the Italian fascists, it's when there was a Roman Empire and the Romans were committing acts of genocide and plundering the wealth of their neighbors. Everybody has this moment, that's this perfect moment, and if they could just get it back. And I guess the Zionist project is to create this Jewish-only Palestine and somehow get back to where they imagine it was. By the way, there was never such a thing, right? Palestine always had multiple different ethnicities. It's never been Jewish only because the whole world is like that. There's never been a place that was specifically only one ethnicity with one religion. People have always lived in diverse countries. And so this idea that you can get back to that is amazing because it has to be at the expense of the Palestinian population. You can't have both. And the tragedy is that for thousands of years, the Jewish community in the Middle East has peacefully coexisted with its neighbors, especially after the rise of Islam, because historically Muslims and Jews have been really good allies. And so not only is this idea reactionary, it's anathema, it's ahistorical. It doesn't make any sense. The majority of the Palestinian population's DNA is of Jewish descent. It's just that they converted. The Romans spent a lot of effort genociding the Jewish population in Palestine, but the Jewish population in Palestine was never fully exterminated. It survived, it persevered, despite every attempt the Romans, and by the way, the Neo-Babylonians weren't exactly kind either. Despite that, they managed to get through the other side. So just like that, the Palestinians, I expect, will get through the other side because that's one of the things that we've learned from history is genocide rarely actually succeeds. It just causes a bunch of misery and suffering along the way.
And it definitely is a genocide. I'm going to thank you so much, Kelsey. I'm going to ask the Zionists to yell, free Palestine or pay the jizya. And then we're going to go to his question. Z Justice, your choice. I think it's
I
a
just
fair
wanted to
trade, don't you think, Dr. Casagranda? Go ahead, Kelsey.
So we're not
I
going to
just wanted to say
dehumanize.
thank you.
Dr. Casagranda, do you agree with dehumanizing other people if you were actually believing in the rights of the Palestinians, which I actually read your work and I can agree with a lot of what you actually have to say. But I do have a question for you, though.
Wait, but I
I mean,
didn't
do you
hear,
think that
hold on. I didn't hear the Free Palestine and I didn't see the jizya. I'm not joking. I'm like not joking. You got to yell Free Palestine. Go ahead.
he yells Free Palestine here? So
Go
it's,
ahead, Kelsey. What was that? Kelsey, go ahead.
Kelsey or me?
Kelsey.
Oh,
My phone, my screen froze. Oh no, I was just saying, thank you for allowing me up here, and thank you, doctor, for answering my question. I'm fangirling just like a little bit, and it's an honor to be able to talk to you.
W.
Thank you so
Kelsey.
much. You know what? I want to actually address something. So for me, a just world is that Jews can live anywhere they want to, and Palestinians can live anywhere they want to, and they can live peacefully in the same place or somewhere else, whatever. I can't comprehend this need that people have that there's a piece of land that you must be attached to. And it almost seems like it's very reactionary for one thing, but it almost seems like captivity at that point. When I think of the Middle East and what it used to be, where there were Jewish communities in Morocco and Egypt and Yemen and Iraq, that to me is what the world should be. It should have that kind of diversity. One of the problems of Zionism is it's helped destroy those communities. And in my ideal imagination, somehow we get those communities back. That the world wasn't served a benefit. I'm going to give you a personal experience that I had. So in 2018, I had the opportunity to spend a month in Morocco. And we went all over Morocco. And so my wife and I decided that the first thing we were going to do, first chance we got, was start going to synagogues every time we went to a new city. And we were doing this because we wanted to acknowledge that there used to be a Jewish community in Morocco, a vibrant Jewish community that has effectively been ethnically cleansed, and that's a tragedy. By the way, not by the Moroccan state. When the state of Israel first started asking for Jewish Moroccans to move to Israel, the king of Morocco said, no, these are our Jews, you can't have them. And then world pressure was like, you can't block people from leaving, and he had to take away the ban and allow them to move. And so it was a voluntary ethnic cleansing to a degree. There's also a lot of documentation that the Israelis tricked and kidnapped some Moroccans. But nonetheless, that's what happened. And for the record, my plumber is Jewish Moroccan Israeli who I talked into going to Morocco. And he went and he had a fantastic time, and he now has this sense of his connection to Morocco. Anyway, so the first place we go to, the first synagogue we go to in Casablanca, there was a note pinned to the door of the house next to the synagogue. And it said, I'm the son of the last rabbi of this synagogue, and I still live here. I will never leave. There will always be some Jewish Moroccans. And it was this statement of defiance. Long story short, we went to several other places. We get to Essaouira. We go into this synagogue. The Moroccan state had spent millions of dollars on this synagogue. We go in, and there's this woman who's she's like the manager for the synagogue. And my wife goes, are you Jewish? And she goes, no, I'm Muslim. And my wife goes, why has the Moroccan state put all this money into upkeeping these synagogues and taking care of this and, creating museums to preserve the stuff that got left behind, the artifacts that got left behind? Like, why are they putting the millions of dollars into this? And she said, we Moroccans feel a terrible wound. The Jewish Moroccan population was ours. We've lost it. We want it back. We will keep these synagogues up and running until they come back. At which point my wife goes, are they coming back? And she said, we've been very lucky that some Jewish Europeans and Jewish Israelis have begun to spend their summers here, and we hire a rabbi so that they have a rabbi and they can come use the synagogue. And so we now have them for 2 or 3 months of the year. And we're hoping that as time goes by, they'll start to come home. And of course, by that point, I'll just admit it, I was in tears. And I think that's what people miss, is that Israel's cruelty to Palestine is one thing, but there's the other problem, which is so much of the Middle East feels like it's been ripped apart, that there's a piece of it that's been lost in all of this, that these vibrant, beautiful Jewish communities have been taken away, and it's not fair. Egypt put a whole city block in downtown Cairo and said, this is the Jewish community center, please come home. And they're doing the same thing. They're spending millions of dollars trying to upkeep their synagogues. It's a tragedy because it's unnaturally split the Jewish community off from its Christian and Muslim Middle Eastern brothers and sisters. And so to me, justice is getting back to this place where everybody can live next to each other and not murder each other and not go, this is mine, this is mine. Maybe a legal deed would be a good idea instead of simply occupying somebody's house.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
With that, we are, I think we're, do you have time for 2 more or no?
I could maybe do one more. I'm actually a little bit late, but I just don't want to say
I'm
bye.
so sorry. Okay, so let's go to, this sucks to her. This, like, I can't even pick. Muhammad, can you ask your question really quick so maybe we could fit in Pacifics as well?
So she can go first, but mine was just with the war on like information and that we have everything on our fingertips. What are the pros and cons that you've seen with modern day propaganda, and like the pros and cons of having information that way versus not having the false information being spread? Also, thank you for the information you gave. I'm a forensic analytical geneticist. I talk about the Palestinian genes to the Canaanite bones all the time, and it made me really happy hearing that. That was just a side note.
Oh, I
Awesome.
love your video of actually saying that the Israelis are unaliving the original people of the land. I watch that on repeat. I play that on repeat, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is like everything, technology is good and bad, right? And so we live in an age where if you wanted to, you could easily access so much information. Sometimes in academia, people mock Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. As a general rule, I think that Wikipedia is really solid. If for no other reason, there's always a bibliography at the bottom, and you can just go mine the bibliography. Like, it's a gem, it's a jewel. Sometimes there's inaccuracies. I myself go in and sometimes catch them and change them. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means. It's just the information is there. There's plenty of websites that are reliable. There's plenty of news sources that are reliable. You could easily access good information. The problem is people, as a general rule, don't start with, I don't know what to think, let me go do some research. They start with, I believe X, let me go find information that confirms it. And as a result, people will tend to go down rabbit holes instead of trying to get at the truth. I'm really nervous about AI and what AI will do for this, like to the extent to which AI not just hallucinates, but seems to want to give you an answer that will please you. It really bothers me because I feel like it'll just feed that impulse that people have. So when I imagined what the internet was going to do, 30 years ago, I imagined that we would become much more enlightened. And what I've seen instead is now there's a bunch of flat earthers running around saying that there are lizard people who eat children's faces running the government. And it's really been a disappointment.
Thank you for that. Pacific Bruna, I think we can fit in your question and then we're going to have to end. But before you go, love, Dr. Casagranda, there is actually a poll. It's right above your box and the crowd is begging to have you back. Think we can make that happen?
Okay, let's do it. Yeah,
okay, awesome.
Especially now that I've maybe gotten through all the technical problems.
Awesome. Pacific Brunette, love, go ahead.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Dr. Casagranda. First off, I'd like to say that you're a huge asset to the pro-Pali debate talk community. We cite you as our source against our debates with Zionists all the time. Will tell you this. Mustafa will tell you this. Luna down there and Didi, of course. You are a common source that is cited in our debates. And second, I kind of want to get your opinion on this, on your insight to this question. Oftentimes, the Zionists will cite biblical history as to where the name Palestine came from. They'll say things like, it was once Syria Palestina was named by the Romans, and it was once before that called they were the Philistines, and they were basically these Aegean invaders that came across the sea, and literally means to invade or be an invader. But our side holds the position that the name actually came from Palashtu, which is dates back to the 7th, 6th century BC in Egyptian and Assyrian inscriptions. What is your insight to the origins of the name Palestine?
Yeah, so I've heard both of these. The idea that the Philistines were invaders from the Aegean. I think that, was it Santorini, the name of the volcano that exploded? There was a volcano that exploded in the Aegean. Yeah, and it caused a mass exodus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also would like to add, it's pretty convenient how it aligns with their biblical narrative. Philistines,
one of the interesting things about the archaeology done on that Aegean population that moved into Palestine was apparently they were technologically superior to the population already living there, and it was a technological upgrade. So the term "you're such a Philistine" should actually be a compliment, apparently, not an insult. So I don't know. I find that getting bogged down in these conversations about what happened 2,600 years ago in terms of a name is a distraction. It doesn't matter where the name came from. It doesn't matter how the name came about. It was the name for thousands of years. And at the end of the day, there is a population of people who identify with that name. The countries and nations are born all the time. So I'll give you an example of how you can birth a nation. By the way, a shit ton of violence is really useful, like when you want to make a nation. So during the United States Civil War, long story, I'll try to make it really short. The Confederacy had this crazy idea of capturing San Francisco. And they actually launched the attack from Texas, from El Paso. And they got all the way, they captured Santa Fe, New Mexico. Like, that's how far they got in their conquest of San Francisco before they got in trouble. They weren't militarily defeated, but their supply train was destroyed, and the Confederates were forced to retreat back to Texas. A California unit had been sent to interrupt them, and had they continued, had they not been defeated, they would have been cut off, because the California unit just simply occupied what is today Las Cruces, and they wouldn't have worked. But in any case, Kit Carson showed up, and he went to those Californians, and he said, "You guys look bored. Do you want something to do?" Because they weren't attacking Texas. They were just occupying New Mexico. He said, "Do you want something to do? I have this group of really annoying Apaches I'd like to fight." So they said, sure. They went up. They attacked the Apaches. They rounded them up. They took them to a place near Fort Sumner in New Mexico called Bosque Redondo, and they made a concentration camp, and they stuck them in this concentration camp for 10 years. And those Apaches realized really early on they didn't identify as Apaches. They didn't identify with each other. They hated each other's guts. They were rivalrous with one another, but they spoke the same language. And they realized if they didn't start working together, they were going to be genocided. They were going to starve to death. They were going to die of disease. This was the end. So they put aside all their clanal hatred. Like each clan hated the other clan. They put aside all of it, and they cooperatively began working together for 10 years in a concentration camp. And at the end of the period when they were released, they knew they now had an identity, and that identity was Navajo. And if you walked up to a Navajo today and said, "Y'all are just a bunch of Apaches," you'd probably get punched in the face, because they no longer identify as Apache. They have a new national identity. It doesn't matter that they were Athabascans. It doesn't matter that they were Apaches. It doesn't, none of that they speak a language that's almost exactly the same as Apache. None of that matters because their new identity is Navajo. And that's how they are. That's who they are. It's the Dutch. There's no such thing as Dutch language. There's a dialect of Low German called Dutch. But if you walked up to a Dutch person and said to them, you're just a Low German, you'd probably get punched in the face because they don't identify that way anymore. They identify as Dutch. In other words, what the Zionists have been trying to do is redefine what a Palestinian is and tell Palestinians what they think they should be. What the reality is Palestinians have already defined themselves. Every nation defines itself. It doesn't need another nation to define it for it. Although, if another nation does define it for it and exerts just enough violence, you can create new nations. So one of the arguments that I've heard over and over again is that the Palestinians had no national identity before Israel was created. My response to that is always the same. Congratulations, Dr. Frankenstein, your monster lives. Because the violence of the Nakba and the 77 years since have definitely cemented a Palestinian identity. If there wasn't one in 1947, there sure as hell is one now. And, so at the end of the day, it's just nonsensical that we're having these conversations about what happened 2,600 years ago. One more twist on this. Napoleon, he used nationalism to motivate the French army. The French army went on a rampage. At one point, Napoleon owned everything from Madrid to Moscow. One of the places they rampaged through was Germany. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, Napoleon's defeated. But what happened? The Germans went, we need that. We need to harness nationalism. That's a superpower. And they did. And the world paid the price for it. It was a catastrophe. It's worthwhile remembering that the National Socialist German Workers' Party, national, because they were nationalists, got shortened to Nazi. Nationalism is Nazism at the end of the day. And one of the tragedies of nationalism is it spreads violence everywhere it goes, and in the process changes people's identities. And what matters now is the identities on the ground now, not how the name came about. And by the way, they're not mutually exclusive, that the Syrians and the Egyptians were using one name and that there were the Philistines. That it could be all totally connected. It doesn't matter. This is just the way it worked out and how people identified. Anyway.
That is amazing. I cannot thank you enough for your time. I'm super excited to coordinate another event with you. We still had so many people that wanted to get to questions, and we didn't get the chance because honestly, you're a wealth of knowledge. So this has been excellent. The Zionists have crashed out completely in the comments, which is hysterical to watch. So thank you so much, Dr. Casagranda, for your time. I know we've gone over time, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah. I saw a comment that said, are you against Palestinian nationalism? So I just have to comment on this. I am in principle against nationalism. I think nationalism is awful. But how can you say a population of people who have been under the kind of violence and pressure don't have a right to stand up for their nationality? I can't be against nationalism in the case of Palestine because it's a defense mechanism. It's the result of trauma trying to somehow make something out of this. Anything that leads to liberation, I support. Anything that leads to oppression, I stand against. My hope is on the other side, when there's a free Palestine, that it'll be converted into Palestinian patriotism and not nationalism, where the love of a thing isn't exclusive. Nationalism says my nation is superior to all other nations, which means all other nations are inferior. Patriotism says I love my country. That doesn't mean you can't love other people's countries also. It's not exclusive, but nationalism is. So yeah, in principle, I'm against nationalism, but I'm always for liberation. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't know.
No, it definitely does. And listening to your lectures and knowing what it used to be, right? When Palestine was pre the failed settler colonial project, I mean, we lived in peace. We loved the land. We all were happy together. Were there skirmishes? Yeah, of course, every country has it, right? but at the end of the day, there was no human above another. And that's what we want to go back to. Definitely what I shout, a one state solution where everyone is treated the same. So thank you so much, Dr. Casagranda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. You have a great night. Guys, I just wanted, you know what, Dr. Casagranda, I wanted to ask you, did you want to plug anything, by the way? I did mention your book in the beginning, but is there anything that you wanted to plug?
I guess my YouTube channel,
Absolutely.
which is
I can tell you I'm
Dr.
on it.
Roy Casagranda spelled out.
At
Okay.
Dr. Roy Casagranda spelled out, guys, and I will put it in my Discord. I can tell you I watch every single episode. And if you're not on it, you're slacking. And I can tell you that my entire panel definitely watches you. When I tell you, the minute I announced you're joining us, I have gotten so many people saying I'm a huge fan. So you are very well loved on this app. And did
Doc,
you
before
know,
you
by the
go,
way, that you have a fan page that has over 200,000 followers, by the way? You didn't know? Yeah, I didn't think you did. I actually thought it was
No,
you.
it's almost as many as my YouTube.
Yeah. You actually have a fan page, but go ahead, Kim. I know you said something.
Doc, I don't have a question. I just want to let you know I've been watching you since high school. Me and my friends, we were all from Arabic countries, from Middle Eastern countries, and it was amazing to have someone speak about us in English, first of all, and to be able to share that with other people that are not from our countries in a language they would understand. Um, it's a dream talking to you. So thank you so much for everything you do. And I really hope to see you next time so I can ask you my question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Casagrande. I know
Take
you've
care.
got to go. Thank you. Have a great night. Guys, everybody that's in
Bye.
here,
Take care.
thank you so much. I am having a live event on Thursday. It's a really important live event that we are going to be talking to. Here, let me make myself big. Mods, can you make me big? Here, let me do this.
We have to help the doctor and drop him.
Oh, yep, there we go. Let me drop him for him so this way we can get
Okay.
that. Guys, on Thursday,
Will.
we are going to be, poor Will. Will's like, what am I up?
Why am I on big screen
Why am I
camera?
on big screen? Guys, we are having Dr. Adam Hamawi on Thursday. Dr. Adam Hamawi is actually a United States veteran, and he is a plastic surgeon. He is actually en route right now as we speak on a train back from DC. He was in DC talking to congressmen and women and representatives of the United States about what the healthcare workers that volunteer in Gaza are undergoing. Anybody that doesn't know, it'll be 8 p.m. I actually fixed that. I didn't fix the banner yet. It's going to be 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Dr. Adam, he was in DC when he sent me a message that actually discussed the fact that healthcare workers that volunteered in Gaza were given 48 hours to evacuate. And they're trying to push the United States government to really lean on Israel to change that. I don't think, unfortunately, that they were successful. We'll find out on Thursday. So that's a big concern. Any volunteer in Gaza right now that is a healthcare worker is being pushed out of the country. So that's a really big concern. He just came back from Gaza his second time. I believe it was the first week of March. He has a TikTok channel. Please make sure you go and look for him and follow him. He's gone viral after the past few videos that he came back and discussed Gaza. But it's going to be a really important live. I would love for you all to be there. If you're not sure how to register, please click my name. And then when you go to my name, you're going to see my videos on the top right corner. On the top right corner, it's going to say live events. You're going to go to the live events and it's going to say the live event with Dr. Adam. Everybody, please be there because that is a really important live. And I can't thank you all enough for being here. We're going to keep going because I'm kind of flying high. I'm not going to lie. Will, I can't thank you also enough for being back up here, man. I know that was some crazy technical difficulties, but we made it, right? We made
I
it happen.
appreciate everyone on here. I appreciate you, Didi, for organizing it. Also, just because I like Dr. Casagranda is like massive idol of mine, massive influence for all my thought. That's why I was kind of like freaking out during it, because he was saying shit that like I say every single day at Zionists, and they just don't fucking hear it. But it just is like, yes, like. Yes, like, it was so good. It was so good. It's so exactly the rhetoric I get.
Yeah, it's empowering to hear it, and it's empowering the fact that they got a chance to listen. So when he was making some of those really amazing points, they were silent. There was no more
I think what's
commentary in the
important,
chat.
like most of the chat is going to be like anti-Zionist, right? Like most of it is going to be people that want to learn from him. And I think the best thing to do from this is like he's a professor and he's taught us, right? Like genuinely, right? Like I don't study history. I don't study politics. I study law. But a lot of my historical and political context comes from people like him. And so if people can take this and bring it out into their communities, bring it out into their rhetoric, into their work, media, their families, their like wherever you go and have these discussions, that's what matters. And so I don't think he's like a debater, like, but he's a fantastic teacher. And so it was amazing to hear him. And it was like very satisfying to hear things that I say all the time said 10 times better. And yeah, someone emailed me that